Today's Reddit cheating story is one that I've been waiting to go through for a minute, and in a rare twist of events, we get to hear how things went down from both sides of the relationship. Today's story begins when Tom's wife, Lori, goes to Mexico for a friend's bachelorette party. Everything seemed normal until he noticed something odd, which was that Lori stopped spending money after 9 p.m. during her first night in Mexico, and she didn't post anything on social media for the rest of the trip, which was totally unlike her. When she got home from her trip, she brushed off Tom's questions and seemed distant with him. But things took a turn when he found a suspicious message on her iPad from the night she arrived in Mexico. Once you've heard Tom's side of the story, you can listen to Lori's side. Who knows? Maybe it'll change your opinion about her. As always, links to the original story can be found on coffeeandpopcorn.co.uk. But let's get into it. Tom found himself in what he described as the biggest crisis in his adult life. And it all started when his wife went to Mexico last week for a friend's bachelorette party. The weird thing about it was, aside from the plane ticket, the hotel, and food and drinks during the first night, Lori didn't spend a single penny during her trip. Which is weird, right? Even if they sat in the hotel all day and night, they would have spent money on food. Surely. Now, Lori would go on to say that it's because her friend took over and paid for everything. But Tom wasn't quite sold on this idea. To make things even more suspicious, Lori's the type of person who posts everything about her life on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. She'd even make posts about getting a latte or picking up the kids from school. But the only thing she posted about her trip to Mexico was a video of them jumping to their vacation spot from the airport, which was a trend on TikTok at the time. Tom was actually excited for Lori, so he kept a close eye on her social media profiles to see what she was up to. But like I just said, she didn't share anything.
Whatever she was doing out there must have been taking up all her time and attention.
Yeah, and when she got home, Tom wanted to see all the pictures she took. I mean, just because she didn't share anything on social media, it doesn't mean she didn't take any photos. In any case, when Tom asked her about it, she blew him off and said that she didn't feel like taking any pictures.
Which doesn't make sense when you're dealing with someone who makes posts about getting a latte. A trip to Mexico would be a golden opportunity for her to make tons of content.
This is true. And it didn't help that last night. Well, the night before Tom first shared this story on Reddit, Lori was acting super distant with him. To get away from him, she slept on the sofa, saying it was because the AC hits better down there, which Tom does agree with. But still, he doesn't seem entirely at ease. In the middle of the night, Tom thinks he could hear Lori talking on the phone with someone, but when he got up to check on her, he tripped over the dog and made a huge racket, which must have alerted Lori because when he got downstairs, she appeared to be sleeping. Tom wasn't ready or willing to ignore his feelings about this whole thing, so in the morning, he had a chat with her.
I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but all this stuff that's going on is making me feel uneasy.
You're a major fucking asshole for bringing this up on my first day back at work.
I wasn't trying to pry, just communicating my feelings to you.
Your communication is prying, and I'm not discussing this with you ever again.
I've got to say, she seems overly aggressive for such a simple question. If I was Tom, I'd be even more suspicious.
Well, after their chat, Lori took the kids to summer camp, and after she'd gone, it occurred to Tom that her text messages are probably synced to her iPad. So he took a look. Once he was able to get into her iPad, there was an iMessage at 9:15 p.m., and it was from the night she got to the resort in Mexico. Tom didn't know who the message was from, but it said, "Okay, I'll meet you in the lobby."
And?
Well, that's where the first part of his story ends, but don't worry, I've got all the updates for you. While I was reading this story though, I thought Lori's actions were super suspicious. Like you said earlier, it's unlikely that someone who posts any and everything on social media would have nothing to share from a trip to Mexico.
I agree, but I've got to know. What happened next?
Well, in Tom's update, he was in the process of getting a legal separation from Lori, and the end goal was to get divorced. But they're not going to rush anything because they wanted to be fair to everyone. Lori wanted to do a mediated divorce because it's cheaper, and while going through all this, they'd have to learn to co-parent and keep things friendly. During this whole time, though, Lori was hoping to reconcile things with Tom, so they both started counseling. As things were, though, Tom didn't have any intention to try and work things out, but it wasn't completely off the table.
How did we get from him seeing a text message to them getting divorced? It seems like quite the leap.
Well, after Tom found that message, his sister got involved, and she's the kind of person who can find out things about anyone if she has a little info to work with. While she was trying to figure out what was going on with Lori, she figured out that she did cheat on Tom during her time in Mexico, and she apparently learned about all this from some real estate guy. Like most cheaters do, Lori denied all the accusations at first, but eventually she did admit to cheating on Tom. The guy she cheated with has 6 kids from 4 different women and has judgments and liens against him all over the country. Tom was shocked this was the guy his wife chose to cheat on him with, but me, not so much. Tom's sister reached out to the guy's wife, letting her know that she had pictures and text messages that proved her husband was cheating on her, but the wife never replied. Tom seems to think that it's because she already knows how her husband is and just tolerates his behavior, but no one knows that for sure. Tom and Lori are living together until the separation is official, and they're unsure if they'll part ways even after it's done. What Tom wants is to remain on friendly terms with Lori. But after returning home from a recent business trip, he no longer believes that she wants to fight for her relationship. That said, she did want to talk, accept responsibility, and was willing to come clean about everything.
When cheaters say they're willing to come clean about everything, you've got to take it with a grain of salt.
Well, Tom wasn't really interested in what she had to say because he learned about everything from the other guy. The dynamic in their relationship has definitely changed though, and Tom thinks she feels utterly humiliated by what happened, as she was very quiet around the house. The kids were kept away from all this drama, and Tom hopes that when they look back on their parents' divorce in the future, they won't really have any bad or toxic memories from this time in their life. Now, quite a few people shared this story as it was quite viral at the time, and while I was browsing through Reddit, I found a post from Lori detailing her side of the story. I swear to God though, this post wasn't up for very long, maybe a few hours at best, but I don't know. Maybe listening to her side of things will give you guys a different perspective on the matter. Let us know in the comments. When telling her side of the story, Lori is clear from the beginning that she isn't making any excuses for what she did, and she wasn't asking for forgiveness either. They were still living together at this point, but they hadn't really spoken much unless it was necessary. Tom had no interest in talking to Lori, and hearing more details about her trip was the last thing on his mind. I think part of the reason for Lori wanting to tell her side of things is because she felt like Tom left some stuff out, but she doesn't think he did it on purpose. She reveals more details about Tom working 3 jobs, which were his well-paying day job, a business he and her father started during COVID, and him being a pilot in the military reserves. Tom's hard work made it possible for him to give Lori and their kids a life she couldn't imagine when she was younger, and she states that she appreciates everything Tom's done for their family.
She couldn't have appreciated it that much given what she did, or am I speaking too soon?
No, it's a fair point, but Lori does have her reasons for stepping out on Tom, and we'll get into that soon. Last year, Tom was deployed for several months, and Lori made him promise that when he got back, they'd talk about ways for him to cut down his workload. She wasn't sure which job would have to take a back seat, but she knew it had to happen because his crazy work schedule made her feel like a roommate, caretaker, and babysitter. And she'd had enough of it. Now, while I get where she's coming from, how much of her comfortable lifestyle would she really be willing to give up? Saying that though, they could already have enough money, and working a lot is just a part of Tom's nature. Anyway, they never really got to talk about it, and every time Lori tried to bring it up to Tom, he always had an excuse as to why he couldn't cut back. He couldn't quit his corporate job because he'd lose stock options. He couldn't quit the reserves because he loves flying, and he didn't want to stop working with her dad because he'd feel like he was letting the family down.
I'm surprised that he hasn't completely worn himself out already.
Funny you should say that, because he also volunteers at every chance he gets for their kids, such as coaching their swimming class. Something Lori hoped that Tom would give up this year since she'd given up on him quitting one of his other jobs. They were actually talking about him quitting the coaching thing 2 weeks before her trip to Mexico, because she didn't want him volunteering 6 days a week at 5 a.m. But to that, he responded,
Hey, swimming lessons aren't very long. Maybe we can do Disney World in the fall.
To be fair though, from Lori's perspective, it's not just about the swimming lessons. It's that, along with everything else, that's the problem.
Yeah, well, Lori even admits to this being a first world problem, but his response to her request made her feel rejected. Still, regardless of how she felt, Lori had no intention to divorce Tom, even if he ignored her needs forever.
She said that?
Yeah, she said she could muddle through being unhappy because Tom's a great guy, so she'd never want to replace him. Still, when a friend invited her to Mexico, she couldn't say no because it might have been the break she was looking for. And, for the record, it wasn't for a bachelorette party like Tom stated in his version of events. Now, on the day Lori was set to fly out to Mexico, she got an email about a parent who made a complaint, and it wasn't the sort of thing that could wait. Alongside that, there were several errands she was supposed to run, one of which was to deposit a small check for her dad's and Tom's business. Even though Lori was officially on holiday, she spent most of her time on the phone and responding to emails, so she forgot to deposit the check. When Tom got in from work to take Lori and her friends to the airport, he was pretty disappointed in her, and while he didn't yell or anything, he made several remarks about how much extra work Lori had caused him.
But he loves working, so he shouldn't have a problem with being given extra stuff to do.
Heh, don't be rude, Gracelyn. So, they get to the terminal, and Lori walked around the car so she could give Tom a kiss goodbye through the window, but he acted like he didn't see her and drove off, which of course devastated her. I mean, she'd given Tom goodbye kisses on hundreds of business trips, flights, reserve weekends, and deployments he's been on, and the only time she'd gone away on her own, he wouldn't do the same for her because she forgot to deposit a $100 check.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, and it doesn't sound like they're struggling for money or anything, so why was he so upset?
Who knows? But Lori, she was crying throughout the entire flight and only stopped 10 minutes before they landed in Mexico. During the flight, the attendants gave her free drinks, which she appreciated, but also suggested that maybe it wasn't the best idea because she got pretty wasted. And this is where things start to go off the rails for Lori. This was her first trip as an adult with two of her friends, and they were a little too excited to listen to Lori bash her husband. Anyway, while they were there, they were approached by an older guy, and rather than refer to him as that, we'll just call him Duncan. That sounds like an older guy name. Lori had the impression that he'd done this quite a few times, and maybe that's because he was confident about how he approached her. This guy, Duncan, said that he'd buy Lori and her friends drinks and dinner, and because she was drunk, perhaps Lori was in the perfect mood to accept. While her two friends came along for dinner and drinks, they actually ended up going to bed at around 10, but Lori didn't want the night to end.
From the outside looking in, you can already see that this isn't a good idea.
Tell me about it. Lori and Duncan ended up going to a beach bar, and while there, she unloaded everything about her relationship on this guy, and he flat out told her that he'd make sure she didn't spend another dime for the rest of the week, as he wanted to show her a good time. In Lori's words, she was white girl wasted, and told Duncan way more than she should have about her relationship. At the end of the night, though, Duncan was more than happy to take Lori back to her room, and he left her there for the night as she proceeded to throw up. On the Tuesday morning, Duncan sent Lori a text message saying that he'd arranged parasailing for everyone. Lori was excited about this, but her friends, well, their spidey senses were starting to tingle about this guy. I mean, what did he want? Why was he being so generous to these women that he'd never met before? And to be fair, these are good questions. More often than not, in situations like this, you can make a safe bet that a guy who's entertaining women like this is on the hunt for some action.
I don't know. Maybe he just wanted to be a nice guy.
Sure. Anyway, everyone ended up going in the end, but Lori's friends said that they wouldn't be accepting anything else from Duncan, which was the right move, because at some point, there's a good chance that he'll be looking for some sort of return. The next day, Lori gets another text message from Duncan early in the morning, and this time, he'd arranged a morning of quad biking. She had to let him know that even though she'd be willing to go along, her friends wouldn't be joining them, which honestly, Duncan was probably happy about, because he'd be able to have Lori all to himself. In the end, they had an okay time, but Lori was super happy to get back to the resort and her friends. And that afternoon, they had quite a few drinks. When it gets to the early evening, Duncan sent Lori another message, saying that there's something in his room that he really wants to show her, and even though everything in her soul was telling her not to go. Ultimately, Lori just couldn't resist.
I find it hard to believe that she didn't figure that this guy had ulterior motives. Guys don't invite you to their room to just show you something.
I think she had a hunch. She must have. Honestly, I feel like she was still pretty mad with Tom, so cheating on him may have been her way of getting her own back. Who knows? But as they were lying face down on his bed, looking at something on his iPad, suddenly, Duncan got up and started kissing the back of Lori's legs, and his lips were pretty close to her swimsuit. While Lori considered this to be cheating, in the moment, her brain was racing and she felt physically okay with what Duncan was doing. That said, she also stated she was pretty drunk and afraid to tell Duncan no, because he's much bigger than her, and that she's the one who put herself into this situation. Somehow, she rationalized to herself that if Duncan went down on her, it'd be okay, as long as he didn't expect anything back in return.
So I guess for her, if she doesn't pleasure this Duncan guy in any way, her cheating won't be as bad. That's the vibe I'm getting from all this.
Yeah, it kind of seems that way, doesn't it? In any case, the whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes, and all he did was kiss her over her clothes. Nothing came off. He did start rubbing himself on Lori's hand though, and that's when she realized, yeah, this guy does want me to reciprocate.
I have to go.
Please stay in the room with me. I'm so drunk that I might end up choking on my vomit.
Sure, but only because I'm worried about you. But if you make one more move on me, I'll scream as loud as I can and call security.
Duncan soon passed out, and Lori just sat there, watching him like a hawk until she fell asleep on a different bed. When she left in the morning, Duncan was very sorry about what happened, and she felt the same way, and that was the last time they spoke. He did message her on the Saturday, saying that his family had arrived, wondering if Lori wanted to meet them.
What? So he planned on introducing a woman he just tried to sleep with to his wife and kids?
Yeah, it sounds that way. Lori wasn't interested in that though, so she never replied to his message. She spent the rest of the week praying about what she did, and never before had she felt so much shame. She told her 2 friends about what happened the morning she left Duncan's room, and they said that if she didn't come clean to Tom, they'd be the ones to out her.
That's pretty strange to me because earlier they were over the moon when Lori was bashing Tom. So why do they care about him so much now?
You're right. Maybe they had a change of heart, or her actually cheating on Tom was too much. Lori did want to tell Tom what happened though, and even though she tried to book an early flight home, she wasn't able to, so she left on the Monday, just like how they'd planned. Like the first time, she was crying on the flight home, and she was super nervous about telling Tom about what happened in Mexico. When he picked her up from the airport, she didn't say anything, but once things were settled at home, she said,
I need to tell you something.
I noticed that you didn't spend any money on the trip. Do you have any receipts I can look at to make sure it's not an issue with the card?
That conversation really set Lori off, and in that moment, she felt a level of hatred towards Tom that she's never felt before. She was pissed that he didn't kiss her goodbye over what she deems a stupid check. Didn't seem upset that they hadn't talked while she was away. Didn't ask how her trip went, but did want to make sure his books were in order. It also didn't help that Tom had blown her off for a year about him cutting down on work, but suddenly he wants her to find receipts that don't exist. Lori was so mad at Tom that she couldn't even look at him, and that night she decided to sleep on the sofa. But even then, she was upset and cried because Tom didn't ask her to stay in bed with him so they could spend their first night together. Lori called up one of her friends, one of the girls she went away with.
So that's who she was talking to when Tom woke up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and she called her to let her know that she hadn't told Tom about Duncan yet. The next day, Lori had to go to work because the issue she was dealing with before she left for Mexico hadn't been solved yet. As she was on her way out, Tom was coming back from coaching the swim class, I assume, and they had a quick conversation.
Did you find those receipts? Also, it's weird that you didn't post anything on social media that week.
I'm never talking about these receipts with you ever again. I can't have this conversation right now. There's something very important we need to talk about when I get home.
Now, Lori didn't go home right away because she had to pick up the kids from camp, and it was during that time Tom's sister found a way to reach out to Duncan. Lori hasn't seen the pictures or messages Duncan shared with Tom's sister, but she has no doubt that they exist. Even though Tom thinks that Lori and Duncan slept together, Lori claims that they didn't. But whenever she offered to give Tom more details about what happened, he'd quickly shut it down. Lori doesn't plan on standing in the way of the divorce process and has done a lot of therapy. And her therapist actually said that she should try to talk Tom out of divorcing, which to me isn't their place. If Tom was truly devastated by what Lori did, he shouldn't feel obligated to stay with someone who'd willingly inflict so much pain on him. Since they've been together from the age of 13, Lori can't imagine living a life without him, but she knows that she screwed up.
Gosh, that was a lot, but has her side of the story changed your mind about things?
I still think she's responsible for her actions, and I'm not wholly sold on what she said happened between her and Duncan that night. I could be wrong, but it just seemed odd to me that she stayed with him until the morning. Lori unloading her troubles onto a guy is an entry-level mistake when it comes to cheating. When you're telling people about your relationship, especially when dealing with the opposite gender, men in particular, you best believe that most guys couldn't give less of a damn about what you're going through. And in Lori's case, it was pretty obvious that Duncan was just out to get some quick and easy action, and there's no easier target than someone who's struggling with their relationship. As I always say, cheating doesn't happen by mistake. It happens due to a series of decisions that someone makes. Lori going on a girls' trip, getting drunk, accepting drinks and dinner from a stranger, telling him about her troubles, and spending alone time with him is what led to her cheating on her husband. At any time during that process, she could have pumped the brakes. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video on coffee and popcorn, and I can't wait to see you on the next one.